Welcome everybody. Have people coming in, so we'll just be patient while that's happening. And it would be really helpful if you started typing in the comments what your clinical background is. So maybe you are a yoga teacher, maybe you're Pilates, maybe you're physical therapy, maybe you're OT, maybe you're Systema, maybe you're Feldenkrais, maybe you work with movement in some other way, or you are even a counselor, psychotherapist. If you could just put that in the comments, that would be ever so helpful for us just to have an idea who we've got here with us today. Thank you so much. Some variety coming up here: yoga, dance, nurse, massage therapy. Therapy. Goodness, we've got lots of problems here with mics. Let me see if I can figure out what that's. I think maybe it's fixed now. Massage therapist, PTA, and Feldenkrais, kinesiologist, physical therapy assistant, psychotherapy, Feldenkrais, MBSR, Feldenkrais, Pilates, massage therapy, Feldenkrais teacher and researcher. We need more of those combinations. PT and Feldenkrais student, Feldenkrais massage, dance, massage therapy. Good.
Oh.
Owen. Yeah, we're getting some nice variety now. Great. That's what we wanted to have happen for this afternoon. Thank you so much for putting that in the comments. Just keep rolling them in. It gives us an idea of what kind of variety we have. Larry, are you okay in the background now if I start to introduce you?
Yeah, give me one more moment.
Okay. Medical massage therapist, yoga, contact improvisation. Oh, nice. Whoa, this is a big background. Osteopath, somatic educator, trained in Feldenkrais, Buto dance. I don't know that I said that right. Feldenkrais yoga dance, movement practitioner, physical therapy, Pilates, part-time dancer, Feldenkrais fan. Good. Occupational therapy. Great. I think that's the first one I've seen of occupational therapy. Good. Music, movement, puppetry with preschoolers. Okay. Beautiful. Fitness professional, fourth-year student, Neo yoga, gyrotonic massage. Wonderful. This is exactly what we were wanting to do, is to offer something for all of you. So this whole afternoon is really for you. And I do think that Feldenkrais practitioners will learn something from it for sure, but it's not specifically oriented towards Feldenkrais practitioners. It really is for all the rest of you who are thinking, okay, I've attended the summit. I'm kind of liking it. I think there's something here, but how would it relate really to my practice and the people that I work with? So that's what we're hoping to really give you a great intro into, or a little more depth would probably even be the right word for it this afternoon. And then just out of curiosity, would some of you start typing some of your questions in that you have, and we can save this chat and see if we can start to weave them into the remaining three. So if you've been watching the summit and you're like, you know, this is the thing that keeps coming up for me over and over again that I'm wondering about, then I could be watching for those in the throughout the next three talks. Well, I'm very pleased to be introducing here today Larry Goldfarb. Larry is a movement scientist. He has his PhD from the University of Illinois, and is a certified Feldenkrais trainer and practitioner. He's a multimedia author, and he has been known for sure for articulating the thinking behind the method. He's taught in professional training programs in Europe, Australia, and North America. He's the founder of Mind in Motion and Mind in Motion Online. And very welcome, Larry, to have you back.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah,
I see somebody who graduated from one of my trainings in Holland. Hello, everyone. So yeah, it's good to see you all. Welcome
good. And
aboard.
you could hear we've got a nice variety of practitioners
Amazing.
and teachers and therapists in our midst. And this is exactly what we wanted to do today, that you would help break open this process of how awareness through movement, and not just an awareness through movement, but you're going to use awareness through movement as an example, this break open the process of awareness through movement, and what are these elements of timing, orientation, and manipulation have to do with success.
Exactly. Yeah. So shall we jump in?
Go for it.
All right. Welcome aboard. Um, I would like today to give you some perspective for understanding Moshe's methodology, Moshe Feldenkrais' approach to learning. The Feldenkrais method is an approach, I like to call it neurophysical learning, NPL, just to play around with the letters a little bit. And I'd like to explain to you kind of where that comes from, what the thinking behind it is. The reason I want to do that is because I think doing these lessons can be somewhat mysterious. It's such a different approach than other ways of learning. It's not the kind of exercise most people think about when they think about exercise. But as Cynthia told you, I'm a movement scientist. In a movement science, we think about 4 different kinds of exercise. Strength and conditioning, endurance, flexibility, and coordination. The first 3 all are based on the same kind of principles. You have to work harder to improve. So if you're strengthening, your muscles have to work more than normal in order to get stronger. The same thing if you're doing endurance, right? If you're running long distance races or doing a triathlon. And also in stretching, we go to the end of the range and we ask for more. When it comes to coordination, and for me, the Feldenkrais method is primarily about coordination. Coordinating our sensory input with our motor output, the sensory motor loop, because that's how we coordinate our physical body. I'm going to talk more about that in a few moments. But when it comes to coordination, we have to do less, not more. I'm going to explain why that is. But let's talk about these. I like to call it Moshe's best friend, Tom: timing, orientation, and manipulation. Now, these concepts are from Feldenkrais' book, Awareness Through Movement. This is my original copy of the book. It is what you would call a well-loved book. I've owned this book for 40 years, and it's barely holding itself together. But this book it was Feldenkrais' introduction to the method, and in it there are a series of awareness through movement lessons. In the second half of the book, and in the first half, there's an introduction to his, you could say, his pedagogy, his teaching philosophy. And that's where he identifies, well, he says that the waking state is made up of 4 aspects: feeling, acting, sensing, and thinking. Feeling, acting, sensing, and thinking. And he says that what makes the Feldenkrais method, is that we start with action. Why do we start with action? Well, we start with action. He said, look, if you think about feelings, you can have a feeling, be it sadness or anger or fear, and it can last for quite a while. It can be difficult. problem to make it change. The same thing with certain sensations, certainly with pain. Same thing with thoughts. You can have a thought stuck in your mind, whether it's, did I shut the stove off before I left the house? Or the latest McDonald's jingle or, popular song. Action is different. We can change how we act moment to moment. That's unique. And so the Feldenkrais method addresses the education of human beings through action. All of these things are connected: feeling, acting, sensing, and thinking at any one moment in time. But our way of working with human beings, with improving human ability, with developing our potential, is through action. And he identified action as having three components: timing, orientation, and manipulation. I'm going to talk about these. I'm not going to talk about them in that order, in alphabetical order, because I think it'll make more sense. Let's start with manipulation, because that's the most difficult one to understand. What the heck was he talking about? Feldenkrais, let me tell you a little bit about him if you don't know much about his background. Feldenkrais was one of the first white men to get a black belt in judo. Before World War II, he was the founder of the Judo Club of France, or one of the co-founders, I should say. He was also an engineer. He graduated from the Sorbonne with a degree in engineering. And so here you have somebody who is studying and a master in an Eastern approach, which you could say is esoteric and metaphoric, and in engineering, which is perhaps one of the, maybe, the clockwork universe. Can you get more Western than that? And before it was cool, before we had, fusion restaurants, well, when we had restaurants, but before we had fusion cuisine, Feldenkrais Moshe was standing in the intersection between East and West. And, I think what he did is he could take his Western understanding of engineering and apply it to this Eastern martial art. And judo itself was such an interesting project. Jigoro Kano, the founder of judo in the late 19th century, the late 1800s, took jujitsu and basically rewrote the whole book, redesigned jujitsu, redesigned the training program so that judo stands for the gentle way. And Kano's idea was that the best way to fight people was not by going against their attack, but by going with their attack. What Feldenkrais discovered, or you could say decoded from Kano's method, was the, maybe before this word even existed, was the biomechanics of efficient human movement. Kano's, the methodology he created in judo was about efficiency, efficient movement, and efficacy, using having the greatest effect with the least effort. And that means that you have to move according to the body's inherent design. And Kano's aim was not to make a better warrior, but was to take the martial art of the samurai and make something that was available to everybody. Judo isn't based on how strong you are or how big you are, but on how coordinated you are. So from judo, Feldenkrais got this idea about how human beings move. And I think as an engineer, what he meant by manipulation when he was looking at movement, right? So I think what he meant, like here's a metaphor. If you think about the skeleton, mine's a little dressed up. I don't know if you can tell from the back of my door. I'm a hataholic, and my skeleton is wearing a hat, but you know, just to be cool. If you think about a skeleton is, this is a metaphor. It's kind of like a marionette. The possibilities it has for movement is determined by the length of the bones and the shape of the joints, which is the actual structure of the joints and the soft tissue around the joints. So the skeleton defines the possibilities for movement. But how do we move that skeleton? Now we have a brain stuck underneath that hat there. Somewhere in the brain bucket, there is this control system. What is the relationship between the brain and the skeleton? Well, if you think about the skeleton as a marionette, and you think about the brain as a puppeteer, then the strings are the muscles, right? Now, we live in a culture where the strings are put on top, right? So many people kind of pray to the strings. Muscles are everything. Now, I don't want to insult anybody. I grew up in a family where one of the things you couldn't say about other people was that they were stupid. That was against the rules. But I'm not talking about a person. I'm talking about a thing. Muscles are stupid, right? It doesn't mean that they don't function on their own, that they don't have some inherent intelligence in the way they're designed, but they're part of a larger system. The muscles do what the brain tells them to do. So when Feldenkrais used the word manipulation, he meant how the brain uses the muscles to manipulate the skeleton. How the brain uses the muscles to manipulate the skeleton. You know, I think that word manipulation is loaded, right? It has a lot of meanings. I would like to say coordination. The muscles are the way that the brain coordinates the whole skeletal system. So that's one aspect. And let me underline one word which might have slipped by without you noticing it, and that's the word system. As a movement as a kinesiologist, I can tell you a lot about how muscles work and which muscle does what job. So, and maybe many of you can, and all of us can kinesthetically from our own sensation. You know, if I lift my arm up to the side, well, yeah, I can feel the muscle here that connects my arm to my shoulder doing the work of lifting my arm up. And that would certainly be the answer on a test, which muscle are lifting your arm. But you know, if it was that simple, there's something wrong with that picture. If I lift up my arm, I change my center of gravity. So what we're talking about, usually when we talk about movement, is we're talking about the public part of that movement. And if you'll pardon the phrase, there's a private part to it as well. There's the unseen part. And the unseen part is what has to happen inside the rest of my body and my trunk and my legs with my head to keep me from falling over. So when we say coordination, we don't mean the coordination of a part of the body apart from the rest of the body. We mean coordination of the entire system. So you could think of the brain, the nervous system as a whole, because your nervous system is not limited to your brain. So let's say your nervous system, it is coordinating what's happening everywhere. It's kind of like balancing your checkbook, reconciling your checkbook, right? The nervous system has to reconcile what's happening in the entire musculoskeletal system, moment to moment. So that's one aspect. manipulation. Another aspect is timing, right? Timing, what does that mean? Well, it means a couple of different things. It means the order in which muscles are contracting. We call that the kinetic chain. Which muscles are contracting when, right? How quickly is the muscle firing? It also means timing in relationship to, in the book, Feldenkrais talks about playing tennis. So, if I swing my racket after the ball has come by or before it's right in front of it, my timing is off. So timing has to do with the coordination of the body moment to moment over time. Right? It also has to do with the timing of the nervous system. Now, remember I said that when we think about coordination or sensory motor learning, doing more doesn't work. Well, doing faster certainly doesn't work, right? In Feldenkrais lessons, as you've noticed, most of the time, not all of the time, there are times when we go quickly, but most of the time, we slow things down. Why is that? That's because there's lag in every biological system. There's delay. It takes time for a signal to go from your motor cortex to the motor neurons in your hand, in your arm, in your back, wherever, that are going to make the muscles contract. Let's say a quarter of a second, a little more, a little less. It takes time for the muscles to contract. It takes time for the signal to go from the muscle, from the joints, from the connective tissue back to the brain. So between the time you decide to move and the time that you sense your movement, that's not instantaneous. So timing is important, because to coordinate your movement means you have to coordinate what you're doing with what you're sensing. That's the sensory motor loop. And that takes time. Finally, the last category, orientation. Orientation means orientation to the environment. The environment, not just the physical environment, the things around you, the things that may get in your way as you move, walls, buildings, trees, mountains, but the environment in terms of three-dimensional space, forward and backward, right and left, up and down, and orientation in terms of orientation in gravity. Remember, Feldenkrais was a judo master. And in judo, the idea is to use your weight, not your strength, but to use your weight, to know where your weight is, where your base of support is, and how you move your weight over your base of support to create movement. In most countries, you can fight City Hall. In a lot of countries, you can win, but you can't fight gravity. So you have to learn to live with gravity and to use it. And that's where this orientation part is so important. It's also important because our ability to control our movement has to do with our awareness, our ability to sense what we're doing. And Feldenkrais famously said, without orientation, there is no awareness. Without orientation, there is no awareness. He made the distinction between, well, here, let's take three states: being asleep, being awake, and being aware. I think most of us know the difference between being asleep and being awake. Sometimes it's a little fuzzy, right? If you're sleepwalking, are you asleep or awake? Right? If you have a lucid dream, are you asleep or awake? I'll leave that for some other experts to discuss. But what's the difference between being awake and being aware? I remember once, many years ago, when I was traveling a lot, I was in graduate school and I was teaching seminars for physical therapists and occupational therapists all around the United States. And usually, you know, I don't know, I did 16, 18, something like that every year. So usually there was a month or so between them, but there was one period, about 6 weeks, that I did 3 different seminars. At that time, I was teaching different ones. The most popular one was called Back into Action. It was a course for physical therapists about how to work with people about chronic back pain. From my experience working in physical therapy clinics, doing that same kind of work and adopting Feldenkrais to that setting. Well, excuse me. The third weekend, I woke up. So like every one of these, by some strange coincidence, at every place I went, I stayed in a Holiday Inn. Now, every Holiday Inn looks exactly the same. I mean, they all are from the same cookie cutter. And it was Sunday morning. I had gone out late the night before, I admit it, and I woke up. I looked around the room, and I couldn't remember where I was. I was in that kind of half awake, half asleep place. I confess, I had to open the drawer in the nightstand and look in the phone book because I was too embarrassed to call downstairs and ask him what city I was in. I am a bit of an absent-minded professor, but I think that's a good example of being awake and not being aware, right? Most of the time, we function on our habits. I think a habit is successful learning. It's something that you learn, that you forget that you learn, that you forget that you forgot. It's something that's automatic. And thank goodness for habits, right? If it wasn't for a habit, I couldn't be standing here talking to you, gesticulating without falling over. If I had to think about my breathing, if I had to think about where my weight is on my feet, how my body movements are affecting my muscle tone and what I have to do to stay upright, it would just be too much of a cognitive load for my system. So we depend on them. But that's the bugaboo, right? When we learn something successfully, the autopilot takes over. How do we wrest control from the autopilot? Well, now we can talk about the Feldenkrais method, because the Feldenkrais method is the answer to that question. How do we change our habits? And here I'm talking about on the movement level, on the level of action, right? Not just movement, but meaningful action in everyday life, right? Because that's a movement. I'm not so much interested in those kind of things. I'm interested in the movements that people do in everyday life. So let me recap a little bit before we go forward, right? I've been talking about Moshe's methodology. I am of the opinion that implicit in the method is a rigorous approach to understanding how people move and how they learn. I've talked about Feldenkrais's book, Awareness Through Movement, and in it, how he described the waking state as having 4 components, action being one of them, being the one that Feldenkrais teachers address. And that action is made up of timing, orientation, and manipulation. And if we want to understand how people learn to move differently, and learn to move from the beginning, then we have to understand timing, orientation, and manipulation in terms of how we develop the patterns of movement that we use in our everyday life. That was a brief recap, just so you know where we are, all right? I keep seeing more people sign in here, and I'm fighting the temptation to look through all the pages and see the people I know. I just, on the few pages I've looked at, I see some people from all over the world, some who I haven't seen in a long time, so I'm glad to see you all. Anyway, So the idea of a Feldenkrais lesson is that we want to interact with the marionette master, the puppeteer, right? The nervous system. Because when we're seeing how somebody moves, we're seeing the result of what is happening in their nervous system, especially in their central nervous system. You know, when Feldenkrais started doing this, the idea that what was happening in the brain would change, right? This notion of neuroplasticity, that did not exist, right? I remember when I was doing my undergraduate work, and I was writing a thesis about the Feldenkrais method already then, before my dissertation. And I had to argue with my professors that, you know, that what was happening in the brain wasn't given, that it was changeable. My thesis, by the way, is available on my website. If you join my website, you can download it for free. I used to charge for it, but you can get it for free from the place that prints up those things. And so anyways, it's available there. And it kind of takes systems theory as a framework for understanding the Feldenkrais method. It takes a different approach than today's talk, so it's not redundant. But anyways, what Feldenkrais, before it was popular, before it was accepted, what Feldenkrais talked about was how the nervous system changes as we learn to move, right? The puppeteer changes. What is going on as we learn to move changes. So how do we change what is going on with the nervous system? Well, we go back to this idea that we learn movements through patterns, right? We don't learn individual movement, certainly on the gross motor level, and even on the fine motor level. Even if you're learning, you know, even if you're playing the piano, your posture, the way the rest of your body is supported, how you move, the weight you put into your fingers, whether you want to play loud or soft, even though your fingers have to be adroit and dexterous, the rest of yourself is involved in that movement. Like I said, all action, it's whole body action. So when we're thinking about changing movement, improving coordination, we're approaching that by developing and changing patterns of movement. If you've signed up for the All Access Pass for this 2020 Feldenkrais Awareness Summit, you've gotten access to the a lesson that's been translated, I think, in 21 languages. And that lesson is, it's awareness through movement lesson. It's one of my lessons. Well, it's actually one of my versions of Feldenkrais' lesson, because it's definitely his lesson. And it's from Back into Action, this series that I mentioned, that you can, let's see, you can get from my website, but let me show you. Can you see that? So here's the lesson, actually. So there's recordings of this lesson. There's also a book that I developed with one of my best friends, Sage Lee, who's an artist. And this is the handbook, which you can also purchase from my website. That was a commercial. But at the beginning of the lesson, there's a scan. I'm not showing you that page, but most lessons start with a kind of inventory, and part of the purpose of doing that is to get the students to shift their attention from the outside world and whatever distractions they may have, internally or externally, to pay attention to their kinesthetic, their felt experience. And the beginning of this lesson starts, if you haven't done it, we'll go through it. It starts with you lying on your belly, and lifting your head up. The character you see there is Flexi. He is the offspring of Gumby, if you know that claymation character, and those artist models that most of us have somewhere in our office. And so you can see at the beginning, Flexi is lifting his, her, their head. And then we're going to look at that's kind of the frame for the lesson. We call that a test movement. It tests the progress of the lesson. So if you're the student, you lift your head a few times to find out what it's like. Now, I said we're concerned with how do you improve this action, lifting the head. Well, lifting the head, well, it's not just a matter of the head doing the work, right? It's the muscles that connect the head to the rest of the body, and that, well, not just that, because if you try to lift your head just by using the muscles of your neck, they're relatively small, and your head is pretty heavy, like as heavy as a bowling ball. So the idea of the method, this is taken directly from the martial arts. Feldenkrais called this notion coordinated action. So it's one of the rules in terms of manipulation of what is ideal movement. In coordinated action, the big muscles make the largest effort. The smaller muscles make a small effort. And the distribution of work, right, is even throughout the system. Now, remember what I said about strengthening exercise. In strengthening, you want muscles to work harder. In fact, in strengthening exercise, you want to isolate specific muscles and make them work harder than other muscles. In efficient movement, you want the work to be distributed throughout the system, and you want the big muscles to do the big work. When that happens, there is no feeling of effort, right? You're not struggling because the work is evenly distributed throughout the system. That is one of the ways, well, you could say that this sense of effort means that you are working inefficiently. You know, for instance, if I want to pick up this stool, if I bend down to pick it up and I lean over and I pick it up like this, it's really heavy. But if I bend my knees and pick it up like this, it's really light. You can tell my voice, my breathing didn't even change. Weight does, the sense of weight, now I'm not talking about Olympic weightlifting, but the sense of weight does not come from how heavy something is, because the stool did not change weight when I picked it up. The sense of weight, which is really a measure of how hard you're working, the sense of effort is a measure of efficiency. So if you feel that something is effortful, or if you feel that it's heavy, that means you're not moving in an efficient or well-coordinated way. So what does it mean to lift your head in a coordinated way? It means that the rest of the muscles in the body, that the body as a whole has to be engaged. And what we're looking for in particular is that the strongest, the biggest muscles work. Those are the muscles attached to the pelvis or going through the pelvis. The muscles of the lower back and abdomen, the muscles of the buttocks, the muscles of the groin, the muscles of the legs, the biggest muscles in the body. So if you look at this lesson, what's the next thing that we do? The next thing that you do is you cross one leg over the other and you straighten the top leg. All right. Now, there are different ways of doing this. But really, the idea is that you straighten the leg by pushing your heel away from you. Now, notice when I say that, straightening the leg, that's a description of manipulation. But pushing the heel away from you, as opposed to lifting your knee up, that's about orientation. That's about how you're moving in relationship to space. But what happens when you straighten your knee in this way, right? So if you like, just to get a sense of this, you could stand with your legs crossed just for a moment. stand with your legs crossed, put, let's say, your left leg in front. You can put your hand on something just to balance yourself. And your right thigh, your right leg crossed behind, so that your right knee is a little bit behind your left knee. You don't have to cross it over that much. Just put your right foot. And now if you lift your heel up, and now you straighten your leg without putting your heel down. So you're standing with your right leg crossed behind your left, right? And you could straighten your knee. You don't have to put your heel down. So don't try to put your heel down, leave it up. So you're standing on the toes of your right foot, the ball of your right foot, and you straighten your right knee. What happens? Well, your pelvis will go backwards, right? The right side of your pelvis will go backwards. If you do this lying on your belly, you'll be straightening your leg, and you will be engaging the muscles of your back to arch your back a little bit, right? So you will arch your back and roll your weight a little bit onto the left side. So what is happening here is that we're indirectly, and this is the hallmark of the Feldenkrais method. The Feldenkrais method is it is an indirect approach to learning, right? We're doing something to give someone the experience of what they would do if they could move as well as they can. In a lesson, you get the experience of what you would do if you were moving as well as you can move, right? So we are eliciting that by having one leg crossed over, you're straightening that leg, pushing the heel away from you, allowing your pelvis to roll to the other side. This engages the muscles of the back. This is not just about engaging the biggest muscles of the body, it's also about finding a way for the muscles of the back to begin working and the muscles of the front to work less. So you do that several times, and you come back and rest, and then we continue in the same position, right? You come back to the same movement, do it a few times, and then you put one arm up. So if you have your right leg crossed over your left, you put your right hand up, you turn your head your head's turned to the right, and as you push your right heel away from you, you push with your right hand, right? So here you are rolling and arching a wee bit. So you're engaging your body in a larger movement than just lifting your head. This activates the extensor muscles. It also begins to create movement in the upper chest and in the thoracic spine, a little bit there, moves the head and the whole body around the left hip joint. Another thing we say about Feldenkrais lessons, we use unusual movements in unfamiliar position to change what someone is sensing. So here we've done these movements. You do this on the other side, same thing, pushing the heel away from you, as you can see, lifting the hip as well. Come back and rest. And now the last step in this brief lesson is you push your belly muscles out. Why do you push your belly muscles out? Well, they're the antagonists to the muscles in the back, right? So to get the flexor muscles in the front, so what you're doing here is you're arching your lower back, you're contracting your psoas, and the muscles in the front, your whole belly, the whole content of your abdominal cavity is moving forward and downward. So this is a way of engaging the muscles in the lower back, these big muscles, to get them to work so that when you come back and you lift your head, it's going to be easier at the end of the lesson. So there you have kind of a walkthrough thinking about this. Now, I could talk about this in terms of what happens gravitationally as well, because if I lift my head by using my neck muscles, I push my chest forward and my weight goes onto my chest. But here, as I'm arching my back, my weight is coming onto my belly. As I'm arching and rolling, my weight is coming onto my lower chest and my belly. So one way to think about this short lesson, right, is that it also gets you to shift your base of support, right? And you can see that we're not trying to improve the movement by improving the movement as a whole, but we're looking at the pattern, and in terms of timing, we're improving different sections of the lesson, bit by bit, and then I'm sorry, different sections of the movement, different relationships that are within the constellation of this movement, so that when we put them all together, they are available. Something happens in the nervous system, right? That when you do something, you make a change, you change your sensation, that hangs around for a little while. So when you come back to a movement that you were doing, it gets folded into that movement, right? So in this lesson, you're learning which muscles to move. You're learning how to coordinate your movement through space. When you take your head up and back, your pelvis does the same thing. Whether the teacher tells you or not, on a sensory motor level, you become aware of the sense of the bigger muscles doing the big work of your base of support shifting. Phew, that was a pretty quick tour through the lesson. These lessons, they're kind of a standard Feldenkrais lesson, about 45 minutes or so long. They're broken into these short 18 to 24-minute sections so that they're easier for people to practice. I mean, I went through I think it's 23-minute long lesson, something like that, in about 8 minutes. And I went through something that's experiential in a cognitive way. You know, just like you wouldn't eat the recipe, the description does not replace the experience. But I hope this gives you some idea of how we think about movement, how we think about how people learn, and how these concepts of timing, orientation, and manipulation can be a useful way to think about lessons. All right. As I've been talking, I've been seeing the chat flying by, but I haven't been reading it. Seeing more people joining us. I'm going to have a sip of tea, and I don't know, Cynthia, are you there?
I am.
I figured.
Yeah, so we could definitely start to move towards questions. You can raise your little hand. There's a little hand symbol. Where is that little hand symbol that you can raise down at the bottom?
I think it's in the participant.
Is it by their name and they find their name at the top and then raise their hand there?
I think it's also called reactions.
Called reactions?
Under reaction? Yeah, it is under reactions. That's the
No,
easiest way.
those are claps and thumbs up. They're different.
Oh yeah.
They're different. So I can also, because I know a lot of times people can't find the little hand raising, you can actually raise your hand here for me, literally, physically, about a comment or question. And we can take it that way as well.
And while we're waiting, I'm going to say bonjour à tout le monde qui parle français, because I see a lot of my francophone friends there.
No comments, no questions that you want to ask Larry while you have him about this whole idea of coordination, orientation, and manipulation. I think the orientation piece is one that would strike several different backgrounds as someone that doesn't get talked about a lot in some of their normal ways of exploring.
Yeah, like somebody said, the hand raising is under participant.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know where it is because I'm in host mode, so I don't see it.
No, and nobody has raised their hand, so we're okay.
Cool. Well, let me look through the chat.
Yeah, we got some discussion going on about body and mature behavior. Definitely also a very interesting book for sure.
Yeah. So Body and Mature Behavior was the first book that Feldenkrais published about his method. Here's my copy. And this is an incredibly dense read. Luckily I started with awareness through movement. And, you know, here Feldenkrais is trying to lay down kind of a theoretical basis for his method. And the subtitle is A Study of Anxiety, Sex, Gravitation, and Learning. I mean, he was talking about movement in the body at a time, you know, when the Freudian approach was kind of ruling the world. And that's part of the reason why sex is mentioned in there. But I mean, he does get to the question of sexuality, but he really starts with thinking about evolution and how we're wired for movement. He talks about fear as the primary reflex, and that, I think that connects us directly to trauma work. You know, I mean, because here he's talking about our response to trauma, be it physical, emotional, of all kinds, and you know what happens physically in the body with that.
Speranza says, is there adaptation for dance professionals doing these movements? I was a gymnast and ballerina and don't get the same gravitational challenges.
Look, absolutely. The thing is that one of the distinctions that Feldenkrais makes in awareness through movement is that moving and learning to move are two different modes, right? When you're moving, you're using what you already have in your repertoire. And, you know, whether you're a dance teacher or you work in a gym, or you are an athletic trainer, or you do rehab, we all know how, you know, what is the most difficult thing for people? It's not just learning new things. It's the things that you can't stop doing. That's what we're talking about when we talk about habits. So if we want to change our habits, we have to switch modes from accomplishing to learning, right? From using our repertoire to enlarging our repertoire. So I think that, you know, in any endeavor, the way that Feldenkrais can be useful is understanding how people learn. I remember when I was studying at the university in Santa Cruz, which is where I live, and Scott Clark, who then was a dancer, who's now a Feldenkrais trainer, came to teach. And I was in my Feldenkrais training, and I walked up to him afterwards and I said, "Are you familiar with Feldenkrais?" He said, "Oh yeah, I read this book, Awareness Through Movement." Because his warm-up for our dance class had incorporated what I recognized was from an awareness through movement lesson, right? So I think that, you know, I mean, Feldenkrais's idea with his methodology was that he wanted to create something that people could use in their profession, whether they were dealing with exercise, with rehabilitation, with education, with psychology.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, absolutely adaptable. And there are lots of Feldenkrais teachers who have taken Feldenkrais into working with dancers of every ilk. I see Donna Blank is here, and a couple of decades ago, she worked with American Contemporary Dance Company, ACDC, in Washington, doing a project actually incorporating awareness through movement with that dance company and using awareness through movement lessons in the place of standard dance warm-ups. And what was really interesting about that is that when the dance company did this, and we're not talking about dance classes, we're talking about a working company, they had fewer injuries, right? So I think this is definitely amenable to whatever of the moving arts and sciences you are engaged in.
Thank you. David, I'm going to unmute you so you can ask your question. There you go.
Hello, Larry. Thank you
Hey,
for that talk.
David,
How you doing?
we just met on Facebook the other
We
day.
did, yes, and you've just been talking about my teacher, Scott Clark, so that was pretty cool.
One of my favorite teachers. Tell him hi for me.
Well, I'll see him on Friday on Zoom, so I'll mention that to him. Just like to explore a bit more about this idea of even distribution of effort throughout the body system in terms of, you know, makes sense that large muscles do the larger work and small muscles do the smaller work. Could you use your ATM? Yeah, I've read that as well.
That's right. So this idea comes from Feldenkrais' second book on judo.
Yeah.
This is called Higher Judo, and that's what he names it.
Can I add something to that? So at the same time, I wonder, there's somebody in the Facebook group that was asking, as a physical therapist, said she needed some help for somebody that has persistent neck and shoulder issues. So I think you might be able to address both David's question and hers at the same time.
Give me a third one. I can juggle. Good enough. Thanks, Cynthia. David, go ahead. Did you want to say more? You're in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just in terms of using, you know, this idea of even distribution, and could you use the ATM you've just been through to explain how the actual lesson itself, even distribution out throughout the body?
Well, since I thought I had done that, I definitely can, and it looks like I need to do it again, so I will. And I think that'll give me a chance to answer Cynthia's question as well. So thanks, David. So look, if I'm lying on my front side and I lift my head like that, that's not even distribution. Now, of course, you know, I don't have to lift my head when I'm standing up. It's falling backwards, but you have to imagine a little bit, right? I'd be using the muscles in the back of my neck, cervical extensors, to lift my head. And if you take some people's idea of movement, what I would do is I would stabilize the rest of my body, co-contract all the other muscles so that wouldn't work, and then I would use my neck. I think that is a description of an efficient movement. Oh, sorry, of inefficient movement. What we're looking for is that so there are actually two ways to think about this. And it took me a long time to think about both of them simultaneously. That, you know, my company is called Mind in Motion, but sometimes I'm a bit slow. So it's slow motion. But so one aspect is this idea of coordinated action. The big muscles do the big work. So that would mean that the muscles of the trunk, that my extensor muscles are going to be arching my back, and that my neck is not going to do the work. I mean, the idea is the big muscles initiate the effort, right? They do that, and the small muscles guide the effort. This is the opposite of the idea of recruitment, right? Recruitment would be that you start with the smaller muscles and you add the other ones. If you look at a baby lifting its head, you'll see that it lifts its butt slightly, right? It doesn't, I mean, its head is huge by comparison to ours proportionally. There's no way that a baby would have the strength in its neck muscles to lift its head just with its neck. So it has to incorporate, it has to rely on, it has to harness the bigger muscles to make that effort, right? And there's another thing we got to think about. It's also that the muscles in the back of the body need to work, and the muscles in the front don't work, right? Because it's even distribution amongst the muscles that are working. So if my flexor muscles are, you know, my abdominal muscles are working at the same time, that is going to interfere with extension. That's co-contraction. And most people's, you know, lived experience of hell, somatically speaking, is due to co-contraction, right? Overstabilizing, I think. And so the idea is in efficient movement, you get the muscles that are working are distributed. So the big muscles make the big effort, and the muscles that would interfere with that work are not working. So that's both sides of it. If we come back to looking, at somebody who has, well, let's say neck problems for, if they're just using their neck muscles to lift their head, if their trunk is so co-contracted, if they're so stiff from how they've learned to move, from the kinds of things they do at work, from the sports they're engaged in, from weightlifting and thinking that holding themselves still and overworking is efficient movement, whatever the reason, when somebody comes to see me as a Feldenkrais teacher, the question I ask is, how are the ways that you are moving and holding yourself contributing to or causing the problem that you have? How are the ways that you are moving and holding yourself contributing to or causing the problem that you have? If I can't answer that question, I can't help you. Right? And so what I'm looking for when I look at how somebody moves is, how are they moving inefficiently? The way I know that is by, I have an understanding in my own body through my training and through learning to observe how people are moving, how people move when they are well coordinated. And I can see how they're interfering with that. And so, some people try to move their arm in their shoulder joint without moving the rest of their shoulder girdle. This is one of the greatest problems for shoulder problems, frozen shoulders, for strain there, for all kinds of injuries in that area. And one of the hallmarks for this is, if somebody lifts their arm and they lift their shoulder, now they're using the neck muscles to lift the shoulder up and to lift their arm up. Those are fairly small muscles. If you want to lift your arm in an efficient way, your shoulder blade actually gets pulled down and in, right? The muscles between the spine and the shoulder do the work of lifting the shoulder. That is a more efficient way of lifting the shoulder. If you habitually lift your shoulder inefficiently, right, or move your head as if it was attached to your neck stick and that was stuck in your head hole on your solid rib cage, you're gonna have a lot of problems in how you move. Feldenkrais said we move according to our self-image. Those are descriptions of the images that people make, and that, how image, not just visual, but how we perceive ourselves, and how those perceptions can be based on our misguided assumptions and on our training. We move only as well as we've learned, and our perception of ourselves is based on what we've learned.
Thank you. We have three really great questions yet to go through, and maybe we'll have more yet. So Deborah asks, I have a question about orientation. It's such a rich topic for exploration in terms of birthing trauma in education. And I don't know, Deborah, would you be willing to unmute yourself? I can unmute you if you'd be willing to.
I just unmuted myself. And the first thing I need to confess is that with this lockdown and the richness that's available on Zoom is that my passions are beginning to bleed into each other. So that my Jungian book group and my sessions with Larry and whole body focusing with Donna are all coming together. So my question may not make any logical sense.
Let's go for poetic sense, Deborah.
That's my favorite. So on Monday, I saw a video recently that blew me away from the field of affective neuroscience. It was a post-birth video of the newborn infant crawling up the mother's body. It was breathtakingly beautiful. I mean, I had to cry while I watched it. The whole point of the speaker was about how that mother's body's landscape is our first environment, and how when we miss that crawl, as so many of us did, and only recently has a neuroscience become available of how much happens in those first 60 seconds, 60 minutes. It's just breathtaking how much happens right then. and that is intended to be the original contact. That skin contact is intended as the original environment. From a Jungian perspective, I'm a hyperintuitive or an HSP. Living in the body has been my whole life's work. And the reason Feldenkrais is so powerful for me is that it forces me, that's the wrong language, but that was the first experience of paying attention to the particle level of existence rather than the wave level. I have brothers and sisters who had great trouble in school in reading because left was right and right was left and up was down. I don't know what was trauma. I don't know what was, but I have real questions about this whole orientation thing and the joy that comes with being grounded and oriented, and you know, just how to enhance and grow that for some of us for whom it is not easy or natural, you know? So thank you, that's it.
Thank you, Deborah.
That's all? Excuse me.
We've got a couple more that are long like that, that'll take a day for us to chew on. So yeah, it's good.
Well, you know, I think of Miriam Pfeffer, who is the Feldenkrais' original student who brought the work to France back in the 1960s. And she used to say, I don't think it was her line originally, but I think of it in her voice. I still hear it in my head. She used to say, in a beautiful French accent, which I won't mimic, it's never too late to have a happy childhood. And you know, I want to say that because when I hear you talking about that, I connect to the feeling of having missed something. You know, I don't think I did. My mom I was a natural childbirth baby, but I can imagine that someone hears that story and thinks, oh, wow, what a terrible thing to miss this.
I didn't mean it that way. I want to
No,
point out.
I'm taking responsibility. I'm giving you a poetic answer. Right?
But I just want to say my brother, who's a trucker, who was shamed and humiliated in school, reads the New York Times every morning now as an independent adult. So yeah, these things.
Whoops.
I'm trying to link my own biology and biography together.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to say, you know, neither biology nor history, neither biology nor history is destiny, right? Feldenkrais talked about living independently of our history. That is so important. I think that is, so I can't answer your question without connecting to that. You know, and that's where feeling, acting, sensing, and thinking mix together. And that's what we see when somebody comes in, when any student comes in, and when every student comes in, they bring their history of being a student with them. Yeah, we work with them in the present. So what I want to do, I reached over, you know, I did think about changing my whole setup so you could see my bookshelf in the background, because that seems to be what you have to do to be cool these days. But my books are all over there. I just reach over and grab another book. This is The Brain's Sense of Movement. And it is by Alain Berthoz. In French, it is Le Sens du Mouvement, The Sense of Movement. And this is a fantastic book about orientation and about how the vestibular system serves this function of coordinating all of the other parts of the nervous system. Miriam and her daughter, Sabine Pfeffer, who's also a Feldenkrais trainer, organized the first conference on movement science and the Feldenkrais method. Berthoz was one of the, he was a star speaker. He was great. I was there. The head of my kinesiology department was there. I also, after a couple of days of presentation, it was my job to translate from science all of the presenters into Feldenkrais for the Feldenkrais teachers to go back and forth. But this book, I think, Deborah, it is one of the two books of science that made me cry when I read it, because I think it vindicated Moshé's idea that orientation is key to awareness. And it's a scientific exploration of how we know where we are. And like, how do you know where you are? I once was lost, and no, I'm not going to start to sing that song. I once was lost in the back bay in Boston, which, I mean, Boston is not like a Midwestern city built like a checker box, right? Like a chessboard or checkerboard. It meanders, streets change names, they wind around. And so I was really lost. And I came upon on the side of a building a sign. It was a pharmacy, an old pharmacy, welcome to Wilson's Pharmacy. And I had a map of Boston, the back bay. Well, actually, it had the Charles River and the park and the church and all these important landmarks. And it had those words, you are here. But it didn't have an X. It didn't have a point. Right? If you don't know where you are, you're not oriented. Orientation and knowing is, you have to know the environment in which you're in and where you are. These things are related to each other. And these are not, it's not just it's how we navigate through the three-dimensional gravitational environment, how we navigate through the physical world and its limits and affordances, and how we navigate through our social and emotional lives, right? All these things are similar and they're related. So I as a great place to start and maybe to weave some of these connections, I'll recommend you to someone else rather than try to give you a big answer for all of those questions, okay?
Thanks, Larry.
Welcome,
Excuse me,
Deborah.
Barry said, since you mentioned the ZOA, do you have opinions about whether excess left-right asymmetry can be pathological in the sense of the left ALC, right BC pattern? I'm referring to the PRI approach, of course. If so, do you think awareness through movement could help? So that is in the chat, about 3 or 4, maybe 5 messages up from the bottom. If you want to read it yourself, Larry, to make more sense.
Yeah, let me see if I can find that.
Yeah, 1256 from Barry. And
Oh.
Barry, if you want to unmute yourself and clarify, you could do that too.
Yeah, so this left AIC anterior interior chain and right BC pattern brachial chain. I mean, I'm not sure if these are I don't think these are common terms, right? These are terms that the PRI call to describe a posture that looks like the Michelangelo's David statue. So
okay.
they're basically arguing that if you have this kind of access, if you got a posture that is natural, this is a natural posture, but it can be excessive. And if it is excessive, it can create a bunch of pathological, physiological problems.
Well, and what's your question about that?
Well, I guess since you have a background, well, I guess, one, do you think this is actually an issue? And two, if it is an issue, how do you think attention, awareness through movement practices could help?
So can left-right, excessive left-right asymmetry actually be an issue? Is that what you're asking?
And I think you were talking about the psoas, right?
Yeah, I mean, an implication of this excess left-right asymmetry is impacting the ZOA, so it's impacting the zone of opposition.
Well,
at least that's the argument.
I would say sure, and in other words, it's a little too focused, right? And you are talking about what is happening in the in the muscles of the, you could say, the core or the center, but we're looking for kind of a systemic description. How does this have to do with how the person is standing, with the orientation of their head. So yeah, I think this can be a part of it, and it can, you know, we could talk about that as an aspect of a habit, you know, and it's an asymmetry side to side, it's an asymmetry front to back. So, but the thing is, you know, if I am if I'm over contracting my psoas on one side and I'm over arched on that side, then, you know, what keeps me from falling? How am I managing that? Am I managing that leaning back and then my flexors need to be doing a lot of work, or am I leaning forward and my extensors are? I'm not. I think that is a useful perspective, but I think from a Feldenkrais perspective, I mean, there's nothing to argue with. I would just want to have a bigger picture and look at exactly what that means about how the person is moving. So it might be a good starting place, and it certainly would be, you know, I can imagine standing in a room and somebody pointing to that and saying, I see this happening. And I would say, yeah, and I see it connected to this and this and that.
Thank you, Ferry, for the question. Thank you, Larry. Jeannie, I think she might be Jeannie, not Jean, I'm not sure. How to define slow and not far? How to know if movement is a slow movement? How to know when I do go too far into a movement?
All right, I love that question. Thank you so much. Because I think often as Feldenkrais teachers, I think this is one thing we could improve. We say slower, move slower. Well, slower than what? That can be a hard thing to say, right? And a lot of times, because some of us, you can tell, I get enthusiastic, I speed up. You know, we have a need for speed. You know, when I get really excited, I might not even notice how excited I am, how fast I'm going. So, because I'm habituated to it, right? I mean, the things that we're used to, they disappear. So one of the reasons we want to slow down is to interrupt that so we can begin to notice what we're doing. As a teacher, I can say, you know, I can give an instruction, and after I've said it, I said, look, if you've done it more than 3 times, you're going too fast. That's one way of measuring it. One way of dealing with that is to think about how much can you notice while you're moving, right? So can you lift your hand, you know, or can you lift your head and notice what's happening with where your weight is on your trunk, with what the muscles of your back are doing, with what's happening in your legs, in your arms, right? So how big is the basket of your awareness? Another way you can measure whether you're going too fast or not is, are you breathing while you're moving? If your breath is interfering, or if the movement's interfering with your breath. So one really cool trick is to move according to your breath. You know, lift your head as you inhale, lower it as you exhale. Try it vice versa too, because there's no one way, but can you link the movement to your breath? And then there's my favorite way, which is, can you pay attention to the beginning of the action? How much can you notice at the beginning? Because, you know, that in and of itself, like when you lift your head, did you press your chest into the floor, your belly? Did your legs stiffen? Did your feet cramp? What did you do with your arms? How much can you notice at the beginning? When you endeavor to do that, you slow down. And, you know, if the beginning of the movement doesn't change, if how you begin doesn't change, you're going to end up in the same place. So the place where change is most possible is at the beginning.
Thank you. Juliana asked, can someone with a longer leg find more efficient ways of using what they have?
Juliana, I hope so. because we all have one leg longer than the other. You know, some people more so than the other, you know, but all of us have some leg length discrepancy. You know, some people are obsessed by a very minimal leg length discrepancy, and other people live with, you know, I remember seeing over the years people who have, who had polio, and one leg, it can be a couple of inches shorter than the other. The idea here is that, excuse me, that, you know, we're not talking about some idealized mechanical structure. It's given the structure that you were born with, the one that developed over your lifetime from the activities you were engaged with, from whatever accidents, injuries, illnesses you experienced, from whatever surgical alterations they were to your structure. Given that structure, the one that you have now, how can you use it most efficiently? The same thing is true with somebody with Bechtere's disease or ankylosing spondylitis, which Supriya just asked about. It's how do you use what you have? So, you know, if you have a leg length discrepancy, you're going to have a scoliosis. Everybody has a scoliosis, at least one. So the question is not to have some ideal structure, right? To be symmetrical right and left. But given the structure that you have, how can you move as well as is possible? That's what Feldenkrais teachers are experts at answering, that question. How can you move as well as you can?
Thank you. Sonia says, someone can be very aware that they are confused and disoriented. Can you clarify this difference of what you mean by awareness in relationship to orientation?
The first answer that comes to mind is the opposite of confusion. And really, because when you're oriented, you know where you are. You literally know where you stand. I mean, you are where your weight is. And where you are is in relationship to the other places that you could be, in front or behind, above or below, right or left. So orientation applies this coordinate system, and it applies knowing where you are in that system. And so, when someone is confused, well, I would begin by orienting them to their somatic, their lived experience, feeling your breath, feeling where you are in space. What is supporting you right now? If you're sitting, where is your weight? More on one buttock or the other? More on one foot or the other? If you're standing, the same thing. What's happening with your breathing there? So the orientation to the manipulation aspect, where you are physically, what's happening with your coordination, and to feel the front and the back of yourself, to feel your sides, to feel them simultaneously. Some people would call that being grounded in your experience and in your relationship to space. So that's what I would say. I don't know if that's enough of an answer, but that's the best I can do at the moment.
Thank you. Well, I think we'll wrap up there because we've got another session at 3. People will need a break if they're going to come back. Larry.
When they're going to come back.
Yeah.
So the next session is David Zemak-Burson, is that correct?
At 3.
Who's also I'm sorry.
He'll be looking at aspects of functional integration and breaking those down into some pieces that might be applicable within other types of practices.
David is a Feldenkrais trainer. He was one of my teachers. I have to say, in all the Feldenkrais lessons I've gotten in my life, he's on the top 10 list. So I encourage you all, if it's a time when you can attend, to check it out or to check out the recording, because I'm sure it'll be valuable.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to teach another class, so I'm going to miss it, but I will catch the recording.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Larry, for being.
Can I say one more thing?
Uh-huh.
I just wanted to give people a peek at my website. So here you can see there's back into action, and there's back into action for teachers and therapists. You can purchase either one of them. You can buy them for yourself or as a gift. On the Mind in Motion website, here's the name for it. It's also listed with it here, mindinmotion-online.com, and it is the first category in the menu on the left, the improved shop category, and you'll find this at the top of that page. So if you're interested in back into action, the recordings or the recordings in the book, that's where you can find it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cynthia.
Yeah.
Thank you. And look, Cynthia, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for putting this whole shindig on. It is amazing. And I don't know if all of you could just give her a round of applause. It's just awesome. I am so thankful and so proud of you. It's just great.
Thank you so much, David. I mean,
Larry, I'm Larry.
Larry, I'm getting confused here. Yeah, sorry. Larry, yeah, I appreciate that. And I appreciate your supportiveness and your being on the cutting edge of sharing things as well, because we all need the wind of each other's sails here for using technology for something like this. It's not our normal Feldenkrais orientation to use technology. So it's a bit of a stretch, but Larry's been stretching that envelope for quite a while. And also he has a lesson that he's been giving away. It will be below the video as well as on the giveaway page that we'll get out to you tomorrow if you didn't sign up for it. It's a lesson that came from his talk, his series and work on prayer. But for those of you who are working with people, you will find those lessons to be very helpful for shoulder, arms, neck issues. Really, I got to tell you, there's some brilliance in a couple of those lessons around neck issues. Brilliance.
Thank you. Thank you. And those lessons, they're kind of interesting. The first part is kind of long to scan because it's kind of, you could say it's a whole course in sensory motor awareness and kinesthetic awareness at kind of the physical part of what it means to listen to yourself. And then there are these lessons in sitting and standing done with your hands clasped and your hands together. It's the first lesson in that series. And you can check it out for free. And you can download it or stream it.
Thank you. So we'll sign off here, and I'll see, I hope, a lot of you back at 3 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And we have Lavinia's replays are already up. If you see other people asking for them, they're up. Larry's will be up within 2 hours. It's been going pretty easily. So we'll look forward to seeing you back at 3 p.m.
And good to see you all. I'm just looking through the people from all over the world who I know. I'd like to say hi to you, but I don't think we have time for me to say hi to everybody. But bienvenue. Pick a card. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
Thanks
Bye-bye,
again.
everybody.
Take care.